Very good afternoon. My name is Song Park, Executive Director of the Monnet EU Center of Excellence of Korea University. And it is my great pleasure to have Dr. Petar Mihatov here and on campus to deliver this special lecture. Before we invite him to be here, I'd like to introduce some VIP guests to you. First of all, from the Korean side, we have Dean of GSIS and DIS, and he's actually the owner of this building. Professor Jae-sing Lee is there, and Professor Kim Nam-guk from the Political Science Department. And actually, I have to introduce that Professor Lee and Kim and me are three Monnet chairs holding this title. I mean, in Korea, we have only 6 Monnet chairs, but 3 of them are at the Korea University. So we are very proud to have very advanced studies and education activities about the European integration. And we have Professor Yoon Seung-hwan of the EU Center, Professor Oh Chang-yong of Nordic Development Center, and the special guest is Professor Jung Se-won, who was serving for EU Center for 4 years, but he was now scouted by another university in Busan. He's a full professor there. So thank you very much for coming. Last but not least, from Korean side, I'd like to introduce a very important person, Professor and Dr. Kim Jae-hong, who was president of Digital University, and also he was a member of National Assembly of Korea. So he is a very influential academic as well as policymaker. So I wanted to reserve some time to introduce him to, and also welcome him to our campus. From Croatian side, I'd like to I'd like to start from Miss Redden, Sunyoung Redden, right? She's in the Croatian embassy, and also we have, just a moment, I forgot the names. We have Marko Zoricic, the first secretary in the embassy, and also Ms. Dunja Sikaja. She's the director for policy affairs, accompanying the director general. And also we have the ambassador of Croatia to Korea, Ambassador Kusen. He was visiting us last year, and he revisited us today. I'm really very honored to have you again. Last but not least, and most importantly, I'd like to introduce Dr. Petar Mihatov, the Secretary General for Policy Affairs of Croatian Foreign Ministry, so Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign and European Affairs, actually. Dr. Mihatov is a career diplomat, but also he was expanding his capacity as a defense analyst as well. So he was also assistant minister for the defense ministry as well. And he has been in Korea from Monday this week, and he visited Seoul, Jeju, and so on, having a number of interesting discussions. And it is really a very big honor for us, Korea University, to have him as a special speaker, and I'm really very delighted to have him. So, Dr. Mihatov, microphone is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I come over there?
Yes, please.
dear friends, Professor, the honor is mine actually to be here and to be able to address you. I think it's very good that in this way my visit to Korea is a small contribution to getting our countries closer and to understanding each other better. So we understand where Korea stands, what your thoughts are here, what your views to the world are, and so we can present our policies and our ideas and our views, and so we can have a discussion. So I made a few notes here in my notebook. I'm not very high-tech, it's just plain notebook. But I would put an emphasis on discussion after my relatively short presentation, and I invite you to ask whatever you think is important, and if you want to interrupt me, please go ahead, I don't mind. I will start with going a couple of decades back. I was thinking where to begin, and I think it's looking at where the world is today. I think it's good to go to an important point, at least I think it was an important point. There was the fall of the Berlin Wall, where there was, at least in Europe, there was a sudden sense of freedom, sudden wave of optimism, and we expected that everything is going to go for the better. And as you very well know, some philosophers, some other political theorists announced the end of history, meaning that liberal democracy and free market economy are going to be embraced by everyone as superior political or economic models. That unfortunately did not happen. This model was not embraced by everyone in the world, and even in the Western world there was a lot of questions raised about what a liberal democracy, the kind of capitalism we have, and the free market economy, what they bring to our societies and our countries. And our systems are based on a certain system of values. And one of the values we have and we promote is a value of freedom of movement, free movement of capital, free movement of good, even free movement of people also. But as you who are professors of economics know better than I do, the capital likes to go where the taxes are low and where the labor is cheap. And now looking back at what was happening even before the fall of the Berlin Wall, but definitely after, was deindustrialization in the West and moving of production to the East, mostly to Asia, a lot of it to China. And that meant that after decades of such process, the Western countries have been becoming weaker, and some Asian countries have been becoming stronger. They got valuable expertise, know-how, and infrastructure also. And the most important, from my perspective here, is China, who made the most out of this logic, this process, this agenda. We all know how in the 70s, in Nixon administration, with a big push of Henry Kissinger, the US tried to open up China for different reasons, but actually China did not change in that endeavor, but it did become much stronger, and it is a big factor today. I would say that COVID was kind of a wake-up call in a sense of security of supply and what this means for us and how vulnerable we are. Yes, we are all intertwined, so it means we're all vulnerable, but we realized how many goods are produced in China and we don't produce them in Europe or in the United States. And I think that China is now making the states think and operate more like states having in mind the national security much more than they did before in this, as I said, end of the history paradigm. And when we look at the United States and what's going on over there, having in mind what I said, I think it's no wonder that Bidenomics and Build Back Better platform present a certain shift, I would say a paradigm shift away from neoliberal agenda. And it seems to me that it's a certain irony that for decades many people in the West, and especially the US establishment, expected that globalization would open up China and make China more liberal, and instead actually the wealth and ambition and power of China unleashed by globalization is now forcing the West to become more statist and less globalist, just to keep up. What does this mean for the European Union? Well, the European Union was born in a sort of belle epoque of liberal capitalism, when the world was a much more peaceful and stable and predictable place. And the mechanisms that the European Union has were more appropriate for that kind of the world than today. It means the soft power mechanisms. First of all, the European Union's economic power, but then its diplomacy, its development assistance to different parts of the world, its sharing of knowledge, building capacities of other countries. So this all worked quite fine. But today it's a different world. I would say defined much more by very complex power relations than by firm structure based on a certain system of values. We from European Union see that Joe Biden is the third president in a row who is in different way by sending a message that the US is not going to be a world policeman anymore, guarding a global liberal order. And the fact that it's not going to be like it was before means that it will be a different world order. I would say that even today it already is a different world order. And world order not with one system of values, or at least not one predominant system of values, but different system of values, competing systems, where none of them has a priori validity or supremacy. On EU's modus operandi, I said that soft power is not sufficient anymore. It means more hard power mechanisms are needed. And except for the sanctions mechanisms that we acquired, which is not a hard power, a little bit more than a soft power mechanism, but not a hard power, there is a growing sense in Europe that we need defense capabilities. And this is a big change for the European Union, because EU was always seen politically as a peace project, and then as an economic entity, a free market, an area of prosperity. And hard security was left mostly to NATO, even though NATO and EU member states are not, I mean, the membership is not identical, but there are 22 EU states, there are NATO states at the same time. So hard security was always left to NATO. Now there is a sense that this is not sufficient. Why is it not sufficient? Well, one reason is the US, and as Obama marked it as a pivot to Asia, which means not leaving the European Union, not leaving Europe, but decreasing their presence in Europe. We saw the continuation of that in a very unusual way during Trump administration. But even today, in Biden administration, relations are much better than the previous US administration. But we also see that the onus of American foreign policy is in this part of the world. So this is reason number one, that the US does not intend to be as present in Europe security-wise as it had been before. And the second reason is Turkey as a NATO member state, which is engaged in most of the crises in European neighborhood, Libya, Syria, Nagorno-Karabakh, other places, and has quite tense relations with some other EU or EU and NATO member states. Now we in Croatia, we have very good relations with Turkey, but we see that this creates a problem for the division of labor. Okay, EU does economy, I don't know, diplomacy, and NATO does hard security defending Europe. So it's not as it was before. So now the European countries, I would say France is the most ambitious in that, is trying to boost what we call strategic autonomy. Strategic autonomy means being more independent in our policies, but it means also having hard security instruments. And we engaged in a number of initiatives like PESCO, we can talk about it later if you want, and European Defence Fund, and some other instruments, and we realized that they're not coherent enough. And that's why on Monday, on the joint meeting of EU foreign ministers and defense ministers, a strategic document is going to be presented, the draft document, called Strategic Compass. That document is supposed to lay out what kind of defense capabilities the European Union needs to be able to address the crisis in its neighborhood and wider. Whether it will be Eastern Europe, the Mediterranean, the Middle East, Sahel, beyond that is debatable. But there is a growing sense that the EU needs its own defense capabilities. And here I want to mention Croatia's position. We very much agree, and actually we have been one of the initiators of this document, and we support this effort to have serious defense capabilities. But what is important for us is that strategic autonomy does not mean that we will deal less with the United States, but possibly even more. But it will be a more capable, security and defense-wise, more capable European Union, a better partner for the European Union and for other countries, especially in Asia. And here I mean countries like India, like Korea, like Japan, like Australia. So strategic autonomy, just to reiterate, for us does not mean any kind of isolationism. It means just being better prepared for some things and then doing things with our partners. The U.S. In this administration, I don't think will become isolationist, as maybe we have seen some tendencies in the past. It will engage with partners, but it is likely to engage on issues of its vital interest. And we think that the issue number one is China and the rise of China. Can the US do it alone or only with a few partners? Well, we don't think so. We think both the US and the EU need this transatlantic bond, which had marked our history for the last 6-7 decades, and definitely Asia partners that I mentioned. I think crucial cooperation will be in technology, as technology increasingly develops, shapes the power relations in the world today. So artificial intelligence, 5G, cloud computing, semiconductors, quantum computing, mobile networks. There is a great need for these countries to merge their capabilities and synchronize their activities. From our point of view, China is one step ahead in many things. And one important thing I want to mention is resources. I think there is a need for us to do much more regarding resources, especially rare earth elements or rare earth metals, which require a complicated and costly process. It takes a lot of time to build infrastructure to mine and process these materials, and leaving it to the logic of the free market means also leaving it to China, and China is well advanced in that regard. So I think that just like oil before, the Green New Deal will yield another battle or maybe a competition for strategic resources like lithium, for the lithium-ion batteries that are essential for electric vehicles, which are then essential part of the green agenda, where China already dominates, like cobalt, where for instance Congo is one of the richest countries in cobalt, and China already has 8 out of 14 cobalt mines over there. Rare earth metals, other metals that I mentioned, and I don't know, in countries like Myanmar and so on and so forth. So I will just point out and conclude here that I was speaking about China, I was speaking about the US, EU, and Asian partners. I would say that this battle of narratives between the democratic world and autocratic world is very important in shaping our futures. And if democracies are to win and contribute more to the world of tomorrow, they must adapt, they must be pragmatic, and they must be strategic. And that does not mean confrontation. It means a dialogue from the position of strength. So it means being more capable, but then talking more confidently. And it means enough realism, because we have to admit that certain countries are powerful and that we need to speak to them. I will stop here actually, and I invite you to ask anything you want to invite. I just wanted to lay down certain ideas as a food for thought for our discussion.
So, Dr. Mihatov, can you sit down?
Sure.
Yeah.
To allow students to have more time to devise good question, let me do the ice breaking for Q&A. And once again, thank you very much for Dr. Mihatov for a very comprehensive lecture on very comprehensive subject, ranging from the European Union's security policy to the strategic autonomy issue and democracy. Well, it's nowadays very sensitive issues, democracy, and also the global supply chain coupled with China. So also I'm personally surprised to see how Croatia is active in contributing and also designing the next stage of European Union's security and foreign policy. So regarding that, the Croatia is located in the adjacent to the lovely Adrian Sea, but also the neighborhood of the Balkan countries. And there are still many candidate countries. So in terms of the future enlargement, well, there are a lot of discussions. There have been a lot of discussions going on, and but there are many kind of sometimes hidden or sometimes explicit issues regarding the future EU enlargement, and upon that, EU's neighborhood policy also applies to those countries. So I think Croatia is located in a very kind of strategic position, linking those candidate countries and the European Union. So my first question is on Croatia's position and the role in the future enlargement of the European Union, and what is your prospect of those candidate countries and the stability and maintaining stability in the Balkans?
Thank you very much. For us, this is a very important area, but I would say not only for us, it's important for the whole European Union. On the beginning, I just want to say that we have a very, very strong Central European identity, because we have been for 700 years part of the Habsburg Empire and Austro-Hungarian Empire, and just a recent part of our history is linked to the Western Balkan countries. But this area is extremely important for us. These countries are our neighbors, and this area is still not sufficiently stable. It's a very unstable European Union courtyard, and we are investing a lot of effort in this issue. Croatia is one of the biggest supporters of enlargement. We think that if we leave this territory out, these countries out of the EU, they will become a zone of extreme instability, and it will be detrimental for the European security as such, but for us the most, as we would be the first to suffer, and we would suffer the most. The European Union enlargement has been defined some time ago, and after the big bang in 2004 with 10 countries joining, we had Bulgaria and Romania joining in 2007, and already at that time there was an enlargement fatigue in the European Union. So when we negotiated more than the previous countries did, and under much stricter rules. And we really did a good job, and the EU would tell us, okay, here's your homework, do it, and let us know when you're done. And we would do it every time, and we would just force them to look at our notebooks and our homework and to see whether everything is fine. And at some point they had to say, okay, well, what the hell, we'll accept you. And we joined in 2013, and now I'm exaggerating a little bit, but the point is that there was an enlargement fatigue already at the time, and we joined because we really underwent democratic transformation. It was an excruciating process for us, but we did it. Since then, and okay, before then we had the financial and economic crisis in 2008 and 2009. In 2015 there was a migrant crisis in Europe, which reshaped the European political scene, not in a good way. And it's, even today, it's a big trauma for many European countries. And we had Brexit. And those things and other things exacerbated the appetite, low appetite for enlargement. And Croatia and some other countries are advocating, look, it's not a matter of admitting these countries or status quo. It's a choice between admitting them or having chaos in your immediate neighborhood. Having said that, we know that the countries are not yet ready for membership. Some of them have been doing well in their democratic transformations. Some of them have not been doing well. And we don't want anyone to skip the criteria. We say they must all fulfill the criteria we did, otherwise they're not going to be good members of the European Union. But it is extremely important to maintain the perspective, however distant it may be. Because these countries have to know that utterly there is a different future from the one they have today, and that future is in the European Union. It may not come in 5 years, it may not come in 10 years, it may not come a bit later than that, but it is possible, and if they really work hard, they will make the EU give them green light just like we did. There's a number of problems in the Balkans, and most of them are legacy of the past. It's nationalistic ideas, very dangerous nationalistic ideas in some countries. It's interethnic tensions, it's border disputes, it's problems with corruption, organized crime, and then we have migrants also present in the region. So there is a myriad of problems. But those problems are EU's problems as well, and if we don't deal with them, we'll just leave them to the mercy of other actors that may not be helpful and that would want to use the situation, and some of them already are. So by not engaging on enlargement policy, the European Union is making itself vulnerable.
Is there anybody else?
I hope I answered your question.
To ask some questions. To break ice again, I'd like to ask one question. Is there any question from student side? Well, if I look at the external policies of the European Union over the last 5 to 6 years, I see some kind of conflicting signals sent to especially China. Because you mentioned China as one of the most important shaping factors of global politics and economics. I'd like to ask this question. When the Trump administration was making a big trouble against the Chinese trade policy, there was a sign from the European Union that you may take the side with China to tame Trump's trade policy for the good of the world economy, right? And also the continuation and final signing of CAI, Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, was a good signal for that, right? It was a continuation of this line of thought, as far as I understand. However, in 2018 and also this year, European Union has issued initiatives, the EU-Asia Connectivity Initiative and also the Global Gateway Initiative from the European Union, These two initiatives contain some elements that the European Union is increasingly focusing on value-based policy, external relations. Then probably this value-based external policy of the EU is targeting China, in my view. Right? So, what is the stance of the European Union about the Chinese emergence as a big power in politics and economics?
Thank you very much. It's not an easy question. Everything that happens in the European Union is very complicated. It's complicated because 27 countries have to agree. In CFSP, we have the system of deciding is unanimity, so we have to have everybody on board. Then there are dynamics between certain member states, certain parts of the European Union, and there is the whole world of European Union institutions that really can give somebody a headache. So everything we do is complicated, but that's what the model that was adopted in the EU as the only way of having integration and cooperation, and never again war in Europe. When it comes to China and policy towards China, we have to have in mind that the member states also have their own views towards China, and the member states have their own cooperation with China. Some of them much more than the others. And this also dictates the dynamics between China and the EU. You mentioned Trump and the EU positioning on China. Well, I have to say that the messages the EU was getting, especially Germany and the EU was getting from Trump, were such that it was almost pushing the EU towards China. And it was very interesting. You mentioned CAI, the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment. It was very interesting that the agreement was finalized just in interim period in the US between the elections and the start of work of the Biden administration. And the signals we were getting from Washington were, okay, so why did you have to do this now? You just use the opportunities to do this. This is anti-US move and so on and so forth. But then, after that, at one ministerial, foreign ministerial meeting I attended also, we introduced certain sanctions based on the global human rights regime towards China. It was Xinjiang. And the response we got from China was so fierce that for many of us it was illogical and counterproductive. Regardless the fact that it was us who introduced the sanctions towards them, they responded with their counter-sanctions so fiercely that it was like pushing the EU away. Had they not responded in such a way, had they ignored the sanctions, which would probably not hurt them at all, I think they would have got the EU in a better place from their position in this triangle, US, EU, China. But then their response was kind of pushing the EU towards the US. The EU doesn't want to be pushed either towards the US or towards China. We don't want to make choices between the US and China. if we had to make a choice, I think most of the EU member states, or all the EU member states like Croatia, would choose the US. There would be not much thinking about it. But it is not our vision of the world we want to have in the future, to have a bipolar world where we would have to make a choice between China and the US. We want to be close partners with the US. We don't like many things that are happening in China. We don't like much of their foreign policy. We don't like much of their regional policy. We don't like the way that they're treating human rights. But they are a big power, and I mean, we have to acknowledge that and deal with it. So I think that a lot of EU's foreign policy is going to continue to be value-based, but if we're going to be more effective, then this value-based approach is going to have to be followed by other mechanisms. I don't know. I mentioned sanctions. It can be sanctions, but more sophisticated sanctions or robust sanctions. It can be better policy synchronization with other countries. It can be hard power mechanisms, and so on and so forth. So the EU is still not 100% clear on how we will proceed with China, but I think this is not going to change, so it's going to continue to be a value-based approach. But yeah, we will continue to talk to China because we have no choice.
Thank you.
I'm not going to leave Korea without at least one question from a student.
Yes.
Definitely there will be multiple. So,
Yes, please. There is.
Okay.
I'd like to raise a couple of questions. First, thank you very much for the great lecture. I really enjoy how you elaborate all the usual from the Berlin Wall and up until now that we are under the pandemic situation. I would like to just raise two questions. The first one is, I really enjoyed how you elaborate the strategic autonomy, the idea of strategic autonomy in the EU, and I like to further want to know your own insights of how Croatia can contribute to the idea of strategic autonomy, because I remember that you mentioned the country was one of the initiators of the documents, so I would like to know how they can contribute to the idea and how you interpret that the idea will develop further after the COVID-19 era. And my second question is, the tension between the US and China was really tense, and it seems like it's been more aggravated after the COVID-19, but I want to know, is there any room for room for opportunity to strengthen the cooperative tie between China and not just Croatia, but like in broad, like European Union?
Well, if I understood everything correctly on EU and China, I don't think the EU will be able to get much out of China on its own. And I don't think the US will be able to get out of China much on its own. And we understand certain American moves, but we don't think it's likely that a lot of countries would subscribe to anti-China alliances for different reasons. And we have to admit that so many countries, as a result of globalization, so many countries are intertwined with each other, but mostly with China. And confrontation is going to hurt everyone. So this goes for Europe as well. For us nationally, we participate in these EU demarches towards China when it comes to their aggressive behavior. But we continue to have a dialogue and cooperation with China. China has some infrastructure investments in Croatia, but we're being careful not to develop strategic dependency as some countries in our Balkan neighborhood did, and that's not good for them. The future of EU-China, I think, will be better if we partner up with other partners, Korea including. But I don't think just because we gather in a club and we say to China, what you're doing in Xinjiang is not good, what you're doing in South China Sea is not good. I don't think that's going to be sufficient. So we'll just have to work more on catching up where China has already been one step ahead, as I mentioned earlier, and I think technology is going to be crucial here. So when we develop more, when we show to China actually that we can do more than they can, that is going to be the most persuasive argument. So not confrontation, but speaking from a position of strength and competence. On strategic autonomy, I had the honor actually at one defense ministerial meeting, I was presenting Croatia instead of the minister, and it was funny how two countries, the Netherlands and Croatia, came up with the same proposal without any bilateral coordination. And the idea was that we have the EU Global Strategy, which is a very smart document, but it's not a guide of what capabilities you need. So between this very general document and actually some kind of input to our military defense planners, we need better guidance. So the first, it was later on taken by Germany. They gave the name Strategic Compass, and now it's pretty much in the hands, well, it's not in the hands of France, but it's France is investing quite a lot because it will be adopted in March during French presidency, this document, Strategic Compass. Strategic Compass has it's not only about defense capabilities, it's also about crisis management or of EU operations. It's about resilience and it's about partnerships. Now all four pillars are difficult. On partnerships, what is important is to not just to name any country a partner, but to know if we're talking about Korea, so we know what kind of partnership we want to establish with Korea, why this is important for the EU, why this is important for Korea, why this is important for, well, I don't know, the world. On crisis operations, I think it's after Afghanistan and the way Afghanistan ended as NATO, the biggest NATO flagship operation, I don't think it's likely that NATO will engage in another large-scale operation, military operation. So it is expected that the EU will have to do more. We have seen also the reluctance of the US to engage in operations in the EU's neighborhood. And to a certain extent, they're right. I mean, it's your neighborhood, invest more in defense and, and become more capable of dealing with the crisis in your neighborhood. We already have certain EU operations, mostly in Africa, but we will have to do more. On defense capabilities, there are bigger ambitions and there are smaller ambitions in the EU. There are countries that want really robust EU capabilities. There are other countries, mostly in Eastern Europe, who say, oh, no. NATO is still our first defense organization, and we don't want to duplicate what NATO is doing. I mentioned two reasons why it's not realistic that the EU can outsource defense to NATO. So we say cooperation with NATO, absolutely. Cooperation with the US, absolutely. But we, as the EU, will just have to develop certain defense capabilities. Now, what capabilities that will be, I can't tell you now because they will be outlined in the strategic compass. Will the focus be on intervention forces, which is likely? So if we have another crisis in Libya, so we can send intervention forces and try to prevent things from getting out of hand. Will it be drones? Will it be cyber capabilities? It will be laid out in the document. And the capabilities that we will develop, the basis for them is a document that we adopted a year ago, and is called threat analysis, mostly done by our intelligence communities. So we know what threats are the most imminent to the European Union. But the last pillar, resilience, is maybe the most evasive and the most complex. What does it mean to be resilient? Let me give you an example. In Croatia, we wanted to replace our helicopters, Russian-made helicopters, so we would reduce our dependency on Russia in defense capabilities. But at the same time, our major retail company a large part of it was bought by Russia, and it created quite an unusual, not very good position for us. So resilience is difficult to grasp, but it can come, influencing can come in different, or affecting can come in different shapes. It can come by different actors, it can come through social media, it can come through regular media, it can come through ideas that are planted in the populations. It can come through energy sources, like we have now the crisis in Europe, energy crisis in Europe, and it puts Russia in quite a good place, especially towards some Eastern European countries. So this is going to be very difficult to define how we will boost resilience towards other actors. But we have to engage in it. There is no way around it.
Okay. Sohi?
I have a question. My name is Sohi, working as a researcher.
Speak up. We cannot hear.
I have a question.
Is your microphone working? No, it is okay.
So I have a question regarding NATO. So how do you see the short future of the NATO? Like
Short?
future future of NATO. So the emergence of the Biden administration and new German leadership and office are raising the multiple opportunities and challenges to NATO. So what is your opinion about this? Thank you.
Wow, very good question. Very good question, thank you. NATO is historically a Cold War type organization or alliance until the end of the Cold War, but especially until 2001 and the terrorist attacks on the US, when we shifted more towards operations or crisis management, and Afghanistan being the biggest operation, Kosovo being number 2. So NATO decided not just to do defense against the Soviet Union, but to engage in a world wherever we have crisis, NATO will engage. And in 2010, we adopted the strategic concept, the Lisbon strategic concept, and defined the 3 core tasks. Collective defense, that means Article 5, if a country is attacked, everybody must defend it. Crisis management, so NATO's operations, and cooperative security, that means partnerships with a number of countries. In 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea and intervened in eastern Ukraine, it was a wake-up call for many European countries. Even though I have to say that 2008 Georgia should have been a wake-up call before that. But then we realized actually that we are not investing sufficiently in collective defense. Especially after the economic crisis 2008-2009, defense budgets of many European states have been shrinking to such extent that it was just the collective defense was really in danger. So we started to raise our defense budgets and invest more into capabilities defending ourselves. When I say collective defense, realistically speaking, on the European continent, it means primarily Russia. And then with Trump administration, Trump had good relations with, wanted to have good relations with Russia, and so he wanted a more balanced approach. So we said, okay, we're fighting threats from the east, but we're also fighting threats from the south, and terrorism mostly coming from the south and the southeast of Europe. Now we see that Biden administration, although they're incomparably more easier to deal with and to cooperate than Trump administration. But Biden is not saying, yeah, okay, never mind what Trump said, I will invest more in European security, we will have more US forces in Europe. No, I mean, that's not what Biden is saying, that's not what Obama was saying. So we will just have to invest more ourselves, be it through NATO or through the European Union. You mentioned Germany also and the new German leadership. It's difficult to say how the future coalition, we expect that it will be the so-called traffic light coalition, the Social Democrats or the Reds, the Greens and the Liberals or the Yellow Party. I think they will be less inclined to invest more in defense than the previous government. And even the previous government, they did raise the defense budget, but they were not so enthusiastic about NATO. For us in Croatia, NATO is extremely important. our defense system is such that it rests on collective defense, meaning that we're not developing the full spectrum of capabilities, meaning that if NATO didn't exist today, we would have only part of capabilities needed to defend our country. And having in mind our unstable neighborhood, having in mind that some of our neighbors want to expand, NATO is very important for us. But it's important also for the rest of Europe. AUKUS was a big blow to transatlantic relations. It was a big blow to NATO, I would say. We gave our best not for it to escalate. France reacted well, very energetically. But we think that the worst point is behind us. But now it seems to me, this is my really personal thought, that the US does not see the EU as an equal partner in the Pacific, but it is inclined to encourage more autonomous actions of the European Union in its own neighborhood. And this is, I think, recognized by France. If you notice, there was a bilateral French-Greek defense agreement, which includes mutual defense clause, which in language even goes beyond Article 5. So it says, if you're attacked, we will come to aid. We will defend your country militarily. So Greece and France. This is an important agreement because when it comes to Greece, they're concerned about another NATO member, so it makes things very complicated. But as I said, for us and for many other countries in Europe, NATO is essential, and we'll do everything we can for it to continue functioning.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to have him for 2 or 3 days more to discuss and ask him out
Next semester.
next semester. But time is up, and we have arranged some dinner for the guests so that we cannot continue. But I'd like to invite you all to give him big hands because he made it a long way to Korea University, and it's really very big honor for us to have you here. Thank you very much. Thank you for the participation, and see you next time. Thank you.